This is the sermon that I gave just a few weeks ago for Vayigash 2012. I don't know how many of you noticed the amount of out-of-the-ordinary events have been taking place in our world during the last week. It was not a quiet week. First, I hope that nobody was able to escape the reactions and the responses to the Connecticut shooting just a week ago. Moments of silence were taken at basketball games, football games, at public schools before classes started. 2 Hollywood movie premieres were postponed due to the violent nature of their films in light of the shootings. The leading iconic talk show hosts who owned the airwaves honored the dead. Late-night comedians chose not to make jokes. And then, quite generically, a campaign born out of a need to respond to the evil was born. And countless people all over the world were stepping up, and still are, and committed to doing deeds of goodness with random acts of kindness. The campaign is sweeping through our social media in the most productive fashion possible. All of the responses that I just mentioned were each of themselves new responses. I really have never seen such a collective and unified response to evil as we have seen this past week in the aftermath of the senseless murder of the 26 innocent children and their caretakers at that school in Connecticut. And there's a shift of winds in a way. There was also this week the endless, insane coverage of those who were preparing for the yet again end of the world. The Mayan Indians could never have guessed what their calendar would one day do for the dramatic at heart. Reading the bizarre justifications and over-the-top human behaviors inspired by this myth of the end of the world had me pondering the reasons why so many people want to believe in such a strange and random perspective of the purpose of life and the place that the earth plays in that escapade. Will the earth explode? Is the explosion about the earth? Or is the destruction of the earth a result of human folly? Or was the supposed destruction of the world set to go regardless of human actions? Was the due date just the expiration date of the earth? Why so many people want to believe in something so unsupported by science, good religion, and basic common sense? We also watched with such gratitude the release of the 4 NBC newsmen who had been taken captive by the Syrian forces in what was a calculated and vulgar planned kidnapping, whose purpose and message was undoubtedly devised to spread fear and terror throughout the world. Unlike the massacre in Connecticut, we gratefully will not be burying these 4 men. Evil did not get its way in this case, thank goodness. I struggled all week contemplating what would I speak about this Shabbat. The stories of Vayigash are still weaving the tale of Joseph and his brothers, stories to which we have, for the most part, hardened our hearts to. We say, you see, that's just the way human beings are. Brothers fight, families fall apart. It's just the way it is. I think I also heard that same refrain when listening to the endless diatribes about how guns are just a normal part of human life. It's just the way it is. Violent expression, it is said, is just the normal of human life. The Mayan end of the world storyline actually just extended this normal to God. I guess in their minds, God will just destroy the world because it's programmed to be destroyed. There you go, all the pain, the suffering, the torture that the destruction of the world will bring. This is just the way it is, and if God's in the mood to destroy, it's all going to come to an end. If the human race sees God as violent and insensitive to human suffering, no wonder so much of humanity follows suit. Yet truth be told, it is not true. Oh, don't get me wrong, the more you say something, the more you set the stage for that reality to transpire. It doesn't make that reality the ultimate truth, it just makes it the truth that you are willing to accept. Here's my connection between Torah and the world this week. Joseph finally tells his brothers who he is. They cry. It's an emotional moment that has lasted for thousands of years. And then he says something very interesting. He says, the tragedy from our past transpired so that I could be here in this very moment when you come for food from the famine back home. It wasn't your doing, the cruel past from which we all suffered so terribly. It was actually God's doing. God was preparing us for this moment right here. In other words, Joseph subscribed to the theory of life as being completely and utterly preordained by God. This is to say that God knows absolutely everything that will ever happen or has ever happened. It would suggest that God knew exactly what that boy was going to do with that semi-automatic death machine to those terrified souls of the children in Connecticut. The idea goes like this. God is omnipotent, and because of this omnipotence, it would be impossible to claim that there is anything that God doesn't already know, not from the past, not from now, and not about any time in the future. God's perfection, say the theologians, necessitates God's 2020 vision to all that ever was, ever is, or ever will be. For these believers, anything that suggests that God does not know everything implies imperfection, and that's impossible because for them, God is utterly perfect. It's a real problem for me, this very mainstream belief system which exists in all of our major faith systems basically says that God knows all of the evil that the world has ever known or will ever know, just as God knows absolutely everything that there is to know. How then can we not hold God complicit in the suffering? If God in fact knows what's coming and does not do anything to save the innocents from the impending evil, then God must be held responsible just as human beings are held accountable for the same actions. I struggled with this for many years of my life, how to reconcile a loving God with a God who knows that the worst evil of the worst evil is taking place every day, every moment on our planet, and yet chooses silence while this evil wreaks havoc in our world to such an extent that people's lives are scarred so deeply that they are often ruined before they even have a chance to begin living. Here's my connection. Joseph, you are wrong. God did not concoct such a terrible and generationally harmful story so that you could find yourself in the position of chief in Egypt when the famine in Canaan took place. I mean, wouldn't it have just been easier to spare the suffering and not to have brought the famine in Canaan to begin with? But more importantly, I don't believe that God's omnipotence extends to God knowing what each of us will do at any and every given moment. This is the only way to make sense of life at all. We must own the integrity of our autonomy as human beings. God's withdrawal from our world comes precisely because of our choices. How many times can God hear human beings saying, "That's just the way it is," while we harden our hearts and desensitize our emotions? How long can God listen to such apathy and human words that are so stripped of even a hint of the divine? How dare the human race speak of our world and imply that compassion, wisdom, responsibility, privilege are not vital and absolutely non-negotiable human attributes for a meaningful existence? This is where we have been made in the image of God, the image of goodness and love. It seems to me that there is really only one critically urgent message that clergy should be giving their congregants in the time in which we live, and that is that it does matter. Every single thing you do and say does matter to our world. Every action you take either elevates creation or it will diminish creation. There is no Las Vegas where everything stays mute. No, not possible. If you paint the world with darkness, you will reflect darkness. If you paint the world with light, you will reflect that light. God does not know what you will do at the very next moment. Only you know what you'll do with the very next moment. Yet your actions can lift this planet to new moral heights, or it can lower this planet to yet deeper lows. Here's the good news. All of those human beings, strangers to the children who lost their lives, they are promising to do deeds of goodness in an attempt to try and balance the weight of evil. That's a mighty job. That has never been before just the way it is. The way it is has never fallen on the side of random goodness. It has rather been used to define the natural state of evil of the human condition. That's just the way people are. Here we see the natural state of goodness inherent in the human race finally beginning to speak up and show its radiant face. It's about time that the tides have begun to shift. So Joseph and his brothers must own their own actions. You and I must do the same as well. If you choose violence, if you choose to believe that nothing matters, then you too will have to own your part in the mess that we call society. So choose wisely. You are the culmination of every choice you have ever made, and that will be the legacy that you will leave to your children and to our world. Violence begets violence, enough said. To those still waiting for the world to explode, it's not going to explode on demand. We will either choose to slowly destroy her by our indifference and greed, or we will learn to respect and honor her and therefore save her for generations to come. Time and our choices will determine the fate of our world. At the end of this very interesting week, I wish for you all a sense of urgency to stir within your soul. Our world awaits your choices of goodness, and we, like God, can only pray for the strength of the human race to see the light that shines through the darkness and calls us to build a world worthy of God's gift of creation. May you be strengthened and encouraged for the choices God hopes that you will make, because absolutely everything matters, and absolutely nothing is just the way it is. It is only and always just the way you allow it to remain. Shabbat Shalom.